Thank you very much, David, and also Wayne for those wonderful introductions. You'll spot immediately that I'm not British. I'm American from Boston originally, but I did about 5 years of curatorial work in Milwaukee. And we had there a similarly beating heart in our education department. She's still in the saddle now after, I think, 43 or maybe 44 years of service at the Milwaukee Art Museum, where I used to work. Her name is Barbara Brown-Lee. And through knowing her, as well as many other educators in museums, I've come to the opinion that really the educators are the ones who do the real work in places like this. And moreover, I almost want to say that curators, who sometimes get into the bad habit of thinking that the educators are sort of, downstream somehow of what they do, I think it's better perhaps for curators to think of themselves as screenwriters and educators as actors, or perhaps curators should think of themselves as composers and educators as musicians, because it's the educators, of course, that actually present the ideas in exhibitions like the one upstairs of Van Wilson's work. It's educators that present those ideas and the works of art themselves to the public. And I think they really are the ones who make the art sing, make the art connect with people. And therefore, all of us in the curatorial field owe them a great debt. And it sounds to me, from everything I've heard, that Sarah Kramer, although unfortunately I didn't have a chance to meet her, was exactly like Barbara is from Milwaukee, somebody who brings the community together and makes the enjoyment and also the intellectual investigation of art really worthwhile, and makes people fall in love, really, which is what museums are all about. So it's a real honor to be speaking in her memory this evening. So what I'm going to offer you this evening is a set of remarks that really is inspired by Ann Wilson's work, although I'll only be coming around to her work right at the end of the lecture. And the title is The End of the Line, Art at the Margins of Industry. And I put up on the screen, just to begin with, this Louis Hine photograph of, I guess you could describe him as an urchin, a young boy working in a textile factory, and you'll see rows of those bobbins, very much like the ones that Anne has used as images in her work. And of course, it's not a happy image, and of course the term end of the line that I'm using suggests some sense of tragedy that is associated with the concept of industry. There are many ways in which we can think of industry as not only a solution to our problems, and of course it is a solution to our problems in so many ways. It makes the goods that we enjoy in our homes, that we see in our public spaces, it makes them possible, it makes them affordable, it makes them higher quality perhaps as well. But it also has brought a lot of misery to people, both coming and going. So that in the heyday of the Industrial Revolution, the days of the so-called satanic mills, as Marx and Engels called them, industry was responsible for reducing many people to a condition like this, dirty, barefoot, working long, long hours, underpaid, malnourished, etc. Ironically, the disappearance of industry in places all over America, but also all over the world, has brought perhaps even more misery than the coming of factories. And I think it's very difficult to think about the question of industry without thinking about some ethical relationship to the question of production, which is to say the question of how things get made. Often that's treated only as a kind of aesthetic question. In other words, do I like the way it's made? Is it well made? But I would argue that the fashion in which we make the things around us, the things we use, the things we own, is perhaps the most ethical question of all. And certainly, if you're thinking about art, the way that art is made, that is to say the way that it is crafted in some sense, bears an ethical responsibility that I think is, in a sense, far beyond any ethical responsibility of the way that the art looks can. Because it's in the reality of production that the lives of people, not only artists but other people, really come to the fore. And so, if you like, what I'm going to give you now is a lecture about art that is entirely informed by images like this one, images that suggest the reality of production, whether that be a happy story or a tragic story. But I'm going to begin with what is perhaps a sort of lighthearted and fanciful point, which is that a lot of the most beautiful things that happen in factories are completely accidental and kind of besides the point. And this is another sense in which I'm using the title End of the Line. I'm using it to mean things that happen either at the beginning, end of the line, the assembly line as it were, or after the assembly line has done its work. So preparatory materials on the one hand, raw materials like the cotton roving, sort of loose bundle of threads before it's spun that you see on the right, or waste material. And I'm showing you here on the left a piece of slag, industrial slag. Believe it or not, in England there's a collection of everything, and believe it or not, in England there is a collection of slag. So the Iron Museum. So here's an example of metal slag, and it was collected for essentially scientific purposes to study the products of a metalworking factory. And the point that I want to make, I suppose, is that these two objects look an awful lot like contemporary art. They have a lot of aesthetic value that perhaps seems unintentional or kind of random, arbitrary, because of course it is random and arbitrary in its aesthetics. It's entirely due to the function or the purpose of these materials or the process that produces them that they look the way that they do. But this is something that contemporary artists, and indeed modern artists, have been attracted to for a very long time. Let me just show you one other example of this. It's an example of what are sometimes called whimsies, which are glass pieces that are made by craftspeople in factories, supposedly at the end of the day, after their work day was over, when they're no longer on the clock. And they sometimes take this form, it's kind of elaborately threaded canes. You'll also see sculptures of animals, little hats, boats, that kind of thing. So an opportunity for glassmakers, in a way, to show off their skill, but in a way also show off their skill to themselves.